The medical bay of Stellaris Outpost Theta had never felt so small. Dr. Khaled stopped just inside the doorway, frozen. His forefingers still curled around his datapad. The human lay on the central recovery bed, torso wrapped in pale regenerative bandages that pulsed faintly with embedded nanits. Arya Vven, engineer, human, impossible survivor. The plasma burn scoring her left side should have killed her twice over. By all accepted medical logic, she should have been dead before security even arrived. But humans, Khaled was rapidly discovering, did not particularly care for logic. It wasn't her survival that held him on the threshold, his throat suddenly too dry to speak. It was the 6 Vikari cubs arranged around her bed like a living barricade. Golden brown fur bristled, ears were canted back, eyes slit-pupilled and bright, followed his every motion with unnerving intensity. Torin, the eldest at barely 9 solar cycles, stood at the foot of the bed, his small body tense. His lips were pulled back just enough to reveal developing fangs. A low growl vibrated through the deck plating. "I need to check her vitals," Khaled said at last, keeping his voice carefully soft and low. Torin's growl deepened. "It's all right," Arya rasped. Her voice was rough, worn thin by pain and medication. She shifted slightly and immediately winced. "Torin, down." The cub didn't move. His ears flattened, but his stance didn't change. His attention remained locked on Khaled's hands, as if any sudden gesture might trigger an attack. Khaled had studied 17 documented species of pack predators. He knew guard behavior when he saw it. Everything in Torin's posture spoke of a sentinel defending a wounded packmate. The unsettling part was that Torin was not an animal. He was a fully sapient juvenile of a species known across half the mapped galaxy for their diplomacy and comm. The Vikari produced mediators, scholars, and negotiators, not. This dot yet here was Torin, shoulders squared, fangs bared, instincts dragging him backward through his own evolutionary history. "Perhaps I should return later," Khaled murmured, taking a small step back. "No." Arya tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Sucking in a sharp breath, 3 cubs darted to her side at once, chirping anxiously, small clawed hands resting against her uninjured arm and hip. "I'm fine," she said, offering them a strained smile before turning her gaze to Torin. "Let the doctor do his job." Torin hesitated, then edged aside just enough to clear a path, though his eyes never left Khaled. The message was clear. One wrong move, and he would pounce. Khaled approached with his scanner held low and non-threatening. One of the smallest cubs pushed herself firmly against Arya's leg, still perched half on the bed. When she caught sight of the scanner, she issued a hiss so reminiscent of an earth feline that Khaled's eyebrows rose despite himself. "They haven't left her side," a familiar voice said quietly from the doorway. Commander Yell, station administrator and ranking Vikari officer, stepped in with deliberate slowness. Silver streaks ran through his dark fur, and ceremonial markings traced his jawline, denoting his age and rank. Ordinarily, such symbols commanded respect. The cubs didn't care in the slightest. 2 of them immediately repositioned themselves between Yell and Arya, shoulders squared, tail stiff. "Commander," Khalif said in greeting, keeping his tone even. "This is unprecedented," Yell murmured, taking in the scene. The attack occurred in Residential Section 7. 3 Krell raiders slipped past the outer net and breached the shelter during evacuation. They found the cubs hiding in a storage compartment. His ears drooped slightly at the memory. Arya Vven was returning from her engineering shift. He continued. She heard them crying. Khalif refocused on his scanner as he passed it slowly over Arya's torso. "Her calcium levels are severely depleted," he muttered. "Bone density shows microfractures throughout. She should be in agonizing pain right now." "I am," Arya said lightly, managing a crooked grin. "I'm just very good at pretending I'm not." She seized a plasma rifle designed for a Vikari heavy trooper. Yell added, almost as if he needed Khalif to understand. The recoil alone could have shattered her shoulders. She killed 2 raiders. The 3rd fled. When security arrived, they found her collapsed in front of the storage door. The cubs were unharmed. He paused, eyes lingering on Arya. She had positioned herself as the last line of defense. "I just did what anyone would do." Arya protested, embarrassed. "No," Yell said quietly. "You did what a human would do." A soft chime sounded from the door, signaling another request for entry. The panel slid open to admit Lieutenant Korvex, the station's security chief, tall and broad-shouldered even by Vikari standards. He filled the space with his presence and with his voice. "Commander, we've completed the investigation." He didn't get any further. 6 cubs erupted into snarling fury. Torin leapt forward, placing himself between Korvex and Arya, every hair along his spine standing on end. The smallest cub scrambled fully onto the bed, claws digging into the sheets as she shook with aggression. The others fanned out, forming that same living wall of fur and bared teeth. Korvex halted, arms raised instinctively in surprised defense. "What in the—" "Lower your voice," Yell snapped. The effect was immediate. As the ambient volume dropped, the cubs' rage ebbed like a receding tide. They remained rigid, alert, but their snarls subsided into wary rumbling. Arya reached out, hand trembling slightly, and stroked along Torin's head between his ears. "It's okay," she whispered. "He's a friend." "Protective," Korvex said a moment later, his translator lagging half a second behind his words, but blessedly set to a lower volume. "Commander, those cubs just tried to attack me." "To them," Khalif said, curiosity finally overriding his nervousness. "You're a large, loud, unknown threat approaching their injured pack member." He adjusted his scanner settings and took another reading, eyes widening as new data scrolled across the display. "Fascinating. Their stress hormones spike specifically when voices are raised near Arya." He glanced at Yell. "They formed a trauma-bonded protective unit with her at the center. She saved our lives." Torin said suddenly. Everyone turned toward him. His voice was still high with youth, but the conviction in it left no room for doubt. "When the bad ones came," he continued, "we were hiding. We could smell them, hear them. She came and stood in front of us. She got hurt protecting us." He looked up at Arya, and there was far too much understanding in his gaze for someone so young. No one will hurt her while we're here. No one here wants to hurt me, Arya said gently. They might, by accident, by not knowing. That's why you watch. You protect, like I protected you. Yell lowered himself slowly until he knelt at the cub's eye level. He moved with the same care one might use when approaching a skittish animal. Though his eyes held only respect, younglings, he said, voice carefully quiet. Arya Vven is a hero of the Vikari people. Your parents are being brought back from the frontier, but Arya needs rest and proper medical care. We'll be quiet. The smallest cub piped up instantly. We'll be so quiet, but we're not leaving. And they didn't. Days slid into weeks, as Arya's wounds were upon, and her strength slowly returned. The 6 cubs maintained their unwavering vigil. Medical staff and visitors alike adapted to the new reality of Bay 3. Approach slowly. Announce yourself before crossing the threshold. Speak softly. Never, under any circumstances, raise your voice near the human. Those who forgot were met with a sudden, united wall of snarling, bristling cubs. It was, as one nurse commented, both the cutest and most terrifying security system in known space. Physical therapy sessions were no exception. When Arya grimaced her way through painful mobility exercises, 6 little bodies moved right along with her. If she raised her arm, they raised theirs. If she tried to stand, they stood, their determined chirps and soft encouragements filling the room. On bad days, when pain left her shaking, they pressed close, forming a warm, solid cocoon around her when their parents finally arrived from the frontier. The reunion was chaotic and joyous and complicated all at once. There were tears, frantic embraces, scolding, and relief. But complications rose almost immediately. When Torrhen's mother gently tried to guide him away from Arya's bed to give her space, Torrhen dug his feet into the deck and refused to move. I need to guard her, he insisted stubbornly. Your human doesn't need guarding anymore, his mother said. She is safe now. Torrhen looked at his mother, then turned to Arya. She was standing with the aid of a support frame, still thinner than she'd been, still moving with care. The memory of her battered body, bleeding and shaking as she stood between them and the raiders, lived behind his eyes. She stood in front of the bad ones for us, he said simply. We stand in front of everyone for her. That's how pack works. Arya felt tears blur her vision. She had tried, several times, to explain that she wasn't really part of their pack. She was just an engineer, just someone who had been in the wrong place at the right time. She'd done what needed to be done. That was all. But every time she saw those 6 forms ranged around her, every time Torrhen planted himself between her and some perceived threat, the words died in her throat. They didn't see a stranger who had helped once. They saw pack. It's all right, Arya said finally, voice thick. They can visit whenever they want. Visit turned out not to be the right word. Years later, long after the burns had faded to pale scars and Arya had returned to full duty, the story of the human who stood between Vikari cubs and death still made the rounds of diplomatic receptions and military briefings. Arya Vven carried an unusual distinction in those stories. She was the only human in known space with a permanent Vikari honor guard. 6 cubs grew into 6 proud adult soldiers, advocates, envoys, but they never forgot the lesson burned into them. In a storage room on Stellaris Outpost Theta, they never forgot the human who refused to yield. No one raised their voice around Arya Vven. Not in the medical bay, not in the corridors, not in council chambers years later. No one dared, not with her pack watching. You said,